Homefront is set in 2027 where the Koreans have become overpowered and successfully invaded America. You play as a mute pilot in the rebel resistance and fight to save the motherland. It's pretty much another standard military first-person shooter, which is fun if you're into that sort of thing, but Homefront ultimately fails at what it tries to be. That being said, it's by no means a bad game. It actually does a lot of things really well, but there's a lot to Homefront that brings it down. This game tried to sell itself as being different from the crowd by throwing confronting ideas and imagery at you, and while at times this can be very effective, it's also the game's biggest downfall, primarily because of the gameplay. The game tries to create a sense of desperation in America, but the actual gunplay feels like a one-man army summer action flick, and the underlying tones of this game are almost completely worn off because of this. There's two ways you can look at Homefront's campaign. If you think of it as a Call of Duty style shallow shooter, it's actually pretty well made, if forgettable. If you look at it as an emotional, story-driven shooter, it's pretty much a failure. As a shooter, the gun mechanics themselves are surprisingly well refined. It has all the basic military shooter elements such as crouching, going prone, hip firing, grenades, C4 and aiming down sights, but it's all refined to a point that it actually feels better than a lot of the big name shooters on the market. The guns in this game have a really good sense of weight and impact to them, without feeling clunky, and a lot of the smaller things that other shooters don't get right are done well in this game, such as the ability to sprint and reload at the same time. What I thought was really interesting was how the shotguns were actually useful at medium range, and how grenade blast radiuses were actually pretty large. The gameplay does have its fair share of problems, however. Movement generally feels a bit too slow, and enemy AI acts stupid and are inhumanly accurate, which I find is a problem with a lot of shooters nowadays. The enemies are either hitting their target, or they aren't shooting at all, which makes for a lot of cheap deaths, particularly when they have rocket launchers.
Shot to the wall.
Also, the teammate AI are idiots. They often steal your cover and push you out into the open, causing you to die, which makes the large open shootouts really fun and the linear corridor shootouts pretty dull. Unfortunately, the first couple of levels are filled with tight areas, but the game gets really fun later in the campaign, where it puts you in massive open areas such as warehouse shopping centers or car parks. The environments are a highlight throughout the game, with American suburban streets, elementary schools, and massive cities. But the level design itself is a mixed bag. As I said, the open areas are cool, but a lot of the linear areas just feel generic and boring. And there's nothing to mix up the gameplay besides a couple of shooting gallery missions and a helicopter mission, which was surprisingly fun. A few times throughout the game, you get to set targets for a massive driving robot thing named Goliath to obliterate, which is also a lot of fun to muck around with. I loved how colourful the game was, and it was much more interesting to look at than most other grey or brown shooters on the market.
Attack chopper! Jacobs, kill that healer! Oh, we are so screwed!
Now, as the story-driven shooter it promises to be, it's paced awfully. From start to finish, this game is action-packed, which works for a shallow shooter, but not for anything trying to have a deep story. The characters in this game aren't well-rounded, and are all stereotypes, leaving you, the player, not caring about them at all. I cared more about Goliath than the characters you spend most of the game with, and as I said, the one-man army feeling of the gameplay leaves the confronting bits forgotten in the back seat. If the gameplay had a sense of desperation or survival, it would have worked a lot better with the setting and story.
Payback for last night's raid. So, this is our fault.
Shut up, Hopper.
Homefront sets a tone at the start of the game with a bus ride, showing innocent Americans being abused and killed as you slowly drive past them. This is very effective until you find yourself mindlessly shooting down and blowing up hundreds of Korean soldiers, which is a lot of fun in itself, and in this case it probably shouldn't be. The game throws a lot of confronting ideas at you around every corner, but they're not as effective as they should be, because the game doesn't give itself room to breathe. It's more concerned about the player having fun than the player being invested in the game. So basically, if you're looking for a solid, forgettable, mindless shooter, you won't be disappointed. This game has great shooting mechanics and awesome level design, but if you're looking for anything more, you will be disappointed. It's a fun game to play through on a Friday afternoon after a hard week, which is exactly what I did. But it's ultimately another forgettable shooter with some great ideas that are lost because it can't figure out its identity. I'm looking forward to the sequel because honestly it has a lot more potential than it thinks it does. I wasn't able to test the multiplayer because all the servers I joined were too laggy to bother with. I think it's safe to say that the multiplayer community for this game, if there ever was one, is close to dead, at least here in Australia. That being said, the maps are quite well laid out and it has dedicated servers and some cool ideas in multiplayer, so I'm sure it was fun when it came out. It was released in 2011 for Windows, the Xbox 360, and the PlayStation 3, and I reviewed the PC version.
Motherfuckers down! Area